Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me again on this beautiful Thursday afternoon. You're here with Evie in the Garden of Evie, which is a part of the Peak Prosperity channel. For those of you who have been here before, welcome back. And for anybody that's new, this is a channel where we're discussing lots of different things, and I'm curious about your insight and your feedback about what's on your mind in relationship to the topic that I'm going to be talking about today. And today, what I want to discuss a little bit is big pharma. I think that we all in the last several years have had some experience with big pharma, whether it is feeling like we had to go get shots in order to keep our jobs, or because we felt burdened by the threat of getting sick and having grandma or somebody else be unwell as a result of our not getting vaccinated. There were lots and lots of instances in the last few years where we've had to make decisions about our health and our wellness as it pertains to what I consider big pharma. And big pharma really is nothing other than a bunch of pharmaceutical companies who have a monopoly on our healthcare system. They are in charge of educating people. So our doctors come out of medical schools that are financed by these same companies. And of course, they influence everything from, the commercials we see on television to the lobbying that goes on in our government agencies and in our Congress and Senate and on and on and on. But one of the things that I've realized, and I wanted to share a personal experience with you today, was that I feel like it's time that we talk about how big pharma tries to keep us really sick and unhealthy. And I'm going to share a little bit of my own personal experience about how that happened to me. And thankfully, I'm not in that place anymore. But for anybody that is going through something like this, I'm sharing because I want you to know you are not alone. And there are things you can do about it. You're not stuck in whatever place you might find yourself at this point. So the place I wanted to start is by talking about how essentially, because they control the media and a lot of what we lay eyes on every single day, what commercials we hear, what movies we see, or, commercials we see, we end up having a lot of data input that we don't have any say over. And that obviously has an influence whether we realize it or not. When we go to the grocery store, we're going to reach for that brand that we're used to hearing about or seeing. It becomes actually pretty unconscious at a certain point. But to start us off, I thought I would read something that I found that this really wise man named Thomas Merton wrote, and it just captured perfectly what I think about sort of the way that these big corporations operate and the nourishment that we don't have as a result of some of the circumstances we find ourselves in these days. He says, "Everything in modern city life is calculated to keep man from entering into himself and thinking about spiritual things. Even with the best of intentions, a spiritual man finds himself exhausted and deadened and debased by the constant noise of machines and loudspeakers, the dead air and the glaring lights of offices and shops, the everlasting suggestion of advertising and propaganda. The whole mechanism of modern life is geared for a flight from God and from the spirit into the wilderness of neuroses." Now, I'm talking about spirituality, and he's talking about spirituality here. And I mean it more broadly, so you could use it however it makes sense for you. For me, my spiritual life has become more and more a center of who I am, but this channel isn't necessarily about religion. It's about finding your authentic center and living in integrity from wherever that is. And it's going to be different for every person here, which is great. That's how it should be. And I think that it's interesting the way he describes the city. Now, I know there are people that really enjoy the city life, the fast pace, the go, go, go. There are lots of interesting cultural things to do. There's great music. You can go and see shows. You meet lots of different people from lots of walks of life. And on some level, I think it's an interesting place to form who you are in the midst of all of that. And at the same time, it's an interesting place to form who you are in the midst of all of that. So on some level, I believe it can start to be confusing. And I know that was true for me. When I was younger, I was going to a very small school. The school that I grew up in, the elementary school, was very tiny. And like I had a class of 30 when I was in my, elementary school years. And then I went to a bigger high school, which had a class of 350 or something. And then I went to a huge college where the undergrad, I think it was like 28,000 or something of us. And so it was kind of a shock for me to go from such a small, quiet life to this huge campus where people were just doing all sorts of things. And it just felt like things were swirling around me sometimes. And I had a hard time finding that quiet space because I actually really enjoyed being alone. But one of the ways that they, I think, make us unhealthy, they don't mind that we don't know how to take good care of ourselves, is because they give us food that's not good for us. And the way that begins is that our food pyramid, which most people here are probably familiar with, right? You eat pastas and grain, you have a protein, you have a vegetable, you have a fruit, blah, blah, blah. We've been marketed that since the 70s, at least. I think it was around the 70s, where the big cereal companies needed a way to make money with all the grains they were producing. And they started to invent a food pyramid that offered to people what they wanted to sell them, not necessarily what was best for them, but the product that they really wanted to move into and to make money from. And so I was taught that, a balanced meal had this particular look to it. It had this much of a starch. It had this much of a protein. It had this much of a grain or a carb. And it's interesting because as I get older, I'm learning that that's not actually the case. That 11, I think it's like 7 to 11 servings of carbs or grains a day is what the average American is encouraged to eat. And that's just a crazy amount of carbs for your body. Your body doesn't need that much. And I don't think our bodies were really designed to be able to break down all of those grains. I actually don't know that our systems are built for that. Maybe in time they will be, but at this point, I find it really interesting because I think there's a correlation between the unhealthy diet that we're eating and our mental health and the other issues that we find ourselves having in this modern day, where we have so many interventions in healthcare, and yet people are sicker and more unwell than they've ever been. I think mine is the first generation where our parents are taking care of us, right? I was born in 1980, and a lot of the people my own age, my peers in the world are completely disabled, have autoimmune issues. Of course, there are other questions around why they might be sick with those things. A lot of the doctors that we've followed throughout COVID, such as the FLCCC and Dr. Peter McCullough and others, have thought that there's definitely a correlation between a lot of these increased childhood vaccines that kids are encouraged or threatened to have to take in order to attend school. And so kids are just getting these crazy amounts of certain adjuvants and things that are within those vaccines that might be unhealthy for them. And so that's, put that aside, and that's obviously not helping the issues that we're having. But additionally, the food that we consume, I think, is worse and worse for us. So when I was a much younger person, I, of course, like any young person, I guess, I felt invincible at a certain point. I thought I could do anything. I thought I could eat anything. I really pushed my body hard. I was rock climbing a lot and teaching outdoor sort of education, how to make fires without matches and how to identify wild edibles way out in the forest up in Maine. And it was great. It was really wonderful. And then I got to a certain point where, and I don't know if it was being pregnant with my daughter or just stressors around me, but I started to have really bad anxiety. And over time, I think my body was really trying to talk to me and say, hey, I don't know that you're handling your life very well, Evie. Like, I'm trying to tell you that something's not right. And of course, me being a naive, not very wise young person, I was like, well, I'm just going to get rid of that signal because that signal is absolutely inconvenient to me. Of course, I didn't enjoy feeling that angst all the time. I'd had a lot of sort of losses all at the same time in my life. My stepdad ended up getting early onset Alzheimer's and passing away shortly thereafter. I was with a partner who, unfortunately, it just was not the right situation, and that person wasn't really interested in having the kind of whole soul relationship that I wanted to have. They'd rather sort of be up on the surface where everything looked great, but they weren't interested in sort of adventuring into what was beneath the skin, so to speak, in terms of deep emotions and feelings and what drives us as people. And so it wasn't really working out in that regard. And I was also a single mom, and I was, trying to work and go to school and take care of my small daughter. And to me, the anxiety at the time was just such a nuisance to begin with, but then it started to really cut into my ability to perform daily tasks. So I went from, having this it almost felt like a seizure when it would come on, because I'd get this quick little sense that something was wrong. And then all of a sudden I could not eat. My appetite was gone. I couldn't sleep often. I would just kind of freeze. My hands and feet would get really cold, and it would just proceed whatever happened after that. And it got really, really bad for a while in there. I lost a ton of weight, and I was really struggling with my health, and I didn't know where to turn. And at a certain point, I think I couldn't carry it anymore on my own. And so I went to get some help, and I went to a local hospital system. They had some kind of anxiety mental health program. You could go and learn some coping skills. And so I'm like, great, that's exactly what I need. So I signed up for that, and I started attending it. And it was unbelievable how unfortunate that whole scenario was for me, because I went from having anxiety, which was awful, to being over, there were a few doctors overseeing this whole program too. So not only were they talking to you about coping skills and things you might do to help your anxiety, they were medicating people. And I was so at my wit's end and so desperate for some kind of relief from this unending inner terrorist that I was like, all right, it's worth it. I'm just going to try this and see what happens. And finally I could sleep and all of that. But at the same time, I was also falling asleep in the middle of the day. And a lot of the other people that were at that same program with me were having the same problem. They were falling asleep during the classes we were supposed to be having in order to get better tools and whatnot. And I should have woken up to it then. I didn't even research it on my own. I didn't even pay attention to what it was they were giving me. And it turned out they'd given me something called benzodiazepine. Now, benzodiazepines, it's an umbrella name for a large group of, I guess they call them anticonvulsants, anti-seizure, but they act on the central nervous system, and they're essentially what was once known in the 60s, I think, and 70s as mother's little helper. It was something that was given to people quite frequently and became really common. And back then it was Valium, right? So now they've come up with more and more classes of these medications. Some of them are short acting, and they work for really quickly, but only for a small length of time. And then they have other ones that take a little longer to kick in, but they'll stick with you a lot longer. And so they tried me on some shorter acting one. I think it was lorazepam, and it's one that they give you often before surgery, or you have some kind of procedure. It just relaxes you, and your body you stop being in that fight or flight. I was dealing with so much trauma back then anyway that I hadn't processed, but that's another part of the story. But it seemed like it was just a small amount too, because the drug that they gave me was called clonazepam, also known as Klonopin. Clonazepam, I think, is the generic name for it. But it's this tiny, it's 1 milligram pills, and I was given 3 a day of these things. And I never checked to see what this drug was, how long I should be on it, what the recommendations were. I actually just had to trust, because I was in that place of vulnerability, that my care providers were going to be taking good care of me. Fast forward a little bit. By the way, the 3 milligrams of clonazepam was equal to about 60 milligrams of Valium. So it seemed like a small amount to me. I'm like, oh, 1 milligram, it's not that bad. No, it was way worse. So they never told me what it was. They didn't tell me that there was a black box warning for that drug. They didn't tell me that you're not actually on the black box warning for it, which is just saying like you got to, as a provider, you have to really read that and make sure your patient is aware of it before you prescribe something like that. What it said was that you're really not supposed to take it for more than, I think it was like 2 to 4 weeks. And even just beyond 2, they noticed changes in the brain. And they call it addiction, which that's fine. I have an issue with that word because when I'm given a medication by a doctor, trusting that they're doing the right thing for me, and then my body becomes dependent on that medication and doesn't know how to function without that, it feels different to me than if I was going out and procuring that medication on my own just to feel good or to get high or whatever, because it wasn't like that for me at all. And I like to imagine it as it's a dependency versus an addiction. Like I wasn't craving that drug. I just know that that drug made me feel better when I was going through a really, really hard time. And the thing that's especially pernicious about these drugs in particular is that you can't just stop taking them. You absolutely can't. It's similar, I think, to people that are really heavy drinkers. If they stop drinking abruptly, they end up going through a whole stage of withdrawal. My grandfather had this before, like you get the shakes. You actually need medical supervision because you can have seizures and die. The same is true of this medication. And so coming into, well, before I say that, 12 years went by that I was on this drug. 12 years, not 2 weeks, not 4 weeks, 12 years. And I was within the same practice that whole time for the most part. I didn't always have the same doctor because people would come and go and retire and not, and I just kind of got passed around to the various providers in this particular practice. But nobody said anything to me about it. Nobody took me aside and said, hey, you know what? I don't know if anyone's talked to you about this, but this is, or how are you doing with it? Or nobody asked me anything. So I was just taking it. Number one, I was taking it all at once because it made me too sleepy during the day to take in like 3 doses. So I was taking 3 milligrams all at one time, which I know is bad. The other thing is that if I didn't feel like I needed it, I wouldn't take it because it seemed like, oh, I felt fine today. I didn't have any reason to reach for that medication bottle and take that thing. And I was proud of myself when I didn't need it. It seemed like a victory to me. Turns out that that's actually the worst thing you could do. There's something called kindling, which is your body is just trying to reach homeostasis. And because of the effect that benzodiazepines have on your whole nervous system, every time you could imagine it, I think Chris has explained it as like the gas pedal and the brake pedal. So benzos, I'm just going to call them benzos for short. That's the brake pedal. You know, if you have your body's revving your gas pedal, which is like increased heart rate and that feeling of like you're stressed out, a benzo comes in and just knocks that back. And, you know, your heart rate slows down, your breathing slows down. And that's why people, if they take it in combination with alcohol or other drugs, illicit or prescribed, I think they end up with respiratory, issues where your body's just like, yeah, I don't need to breathe. I'm so relaxed. I'm fine. Right. And then people don't wake up from that sometimes. But 12 years is a long time for your brain to kind of get stuck in a pattern where artificially the brake pedal is there. Excuse me. It's likely my brain had to create way more of a gas pedal just to compensate for the brake pedal that was there. Think about it, if your body is used to having something come in and really dampen down your energy, it's going to have to get you that much more ramped up just to compensate for that. So you're not asleep all the time. And I do remember some of those years as being incredibly, like I was just tired all the time and I was falling asleep a lot in places that, I guess it made sense, like after lunch or if somebody was talking, I could just find myself drifting off But sometimes it would be when I was trying to drive a car and I had a long distance to drive and I couldn't keep myself awake, and it started to be really scary for me. And more importantly, I think what kind of woke me up to my situation was around the time that COVID happened, it was like 2020, I started thinking like, what if I had to stop taking this medication abruptly? Like what would happen? And when I did some research into it, it terrified me. It terrified me that you could die. That I could die if for some reason there was a supply chain issue and I couldn't go pick up this medication from CVS, right? Then what? And it was horrifying to think about, and it really scared me a lot. And I thought, you know what? I don't want to be a burden to the people around me. I would be so sick trying to come off of this in the middle of something like that. I have to try, because I don't even know, right? After 12 years, who's to say that that's still an issue that I have, that anxiety is still the primary thing that's driving this. And by the way, if anybody is having anxiety issues, I recommend that you go and get a whole lot of blood tests done, because sometimes it is your thyroid. I think it's called Hashimoto's. There are other things that can mimic anxiety, disorders or whatever you want to call it, that actually are not anxiety at all, but indicative of other health conditions. And so at any rate, so 2020 rolls around, it scares me. I start trying to back off of it, and I go to my doctor and I'm like, I don't want to be on this stuff anymore. Like, what do I do? And of course, the doctor's like, well, you just decrease it like 1/4 milligram every couple of weeks. You should be off of it. It shouldn't take more than like, I don't know, a month or two. Like, no big deal, right? Okay. So I went back home and Chris is here with me, and I'm starting to try and come off of it. And at first I start out doing it really quickly and fast, and it just didn't feel right. My whole body was like, I honestly felt like I had hit a brick wall in midair, like going 300 miles an hour. I don't know how to explain it, but it was the worst. It is by far one of the worst experiences I've ever had in my life. And I know what my anxiety was like before. And the way that this affected me and the level of misery that it created right out of the gate, I would take all of that anxiety over what it felt like to try and come off of this drug. I would take 10 times the amount of that anxiety rather than go through this scenario again. It was hellacious. And nobody ever tells you that when you go to the doctor. They just are like, here, take this script. Oh, you're having side effects? Here, have another one. Like, it's ridiculous. And then you get these compounded effects as well, because you're given this med and then you're given another one to try and compensate for the side effects that this other medication creates, and on and on and on. And it just gets worse and worse. So thankfully, I did my own research. Chris helped me as well. But I just was like, this can't be right. It can't be right to come off of it this quickly. Something inside me was like, no way. I'm sorry. I don't care what anybody says. This doesn't feel good. So I started doing some research, and it turns out there's something called the Ashton Manual, which is this really wonderful doctor, thankfully, psychiatrist who, and I think she's another type of physician as well, but she studied and found ways to help patients, because she realized that the way that the brain changes, the chemistry that's actually changed during the time that you're taking a benzo, your brain needs time to heal. It's actually not that different from a traumatic brain injury. The way that your neural connections have to all sort of be reformed or reframed because of the nature of this medication and the what it affects, which is your GABA and therefore your serotonin and all of these hormones in your body. It affects your gut as well. So it's not just your brain that gets messed up. It's your digestion too, which is just awful. So anyway, so I ended up going back to him, and Chris came with me, and we were both like, you know what, this is ridiculous. Like, according to your own NIH stuff, it says that you absolutely should not stop taking this abruptly. No way. And you should let the patient guide the length of time it takes to get off of it. And this is just me taking the medication that they gave me to take. This isn't like I found it on the street and got myself stuck in this situation. I took it exactly as prescribed. And mind you, I'm not casting shade on people that do feel the need to do that. I don't recommend it. And none of this is medical advice, by the way, just so we're clear. I am not a doctor and I am just sharing my own personal experience because it was just so outrageous and so hellacious. And so as I'm starting to come off of this drug, I'm reading everything I could get my hands on. And of course, the first thing when you Google it, when you look up, tapering off of benzodiazepine, what you find are a whole bunch of websites with a whole bunch of like rehab facilities that just want your business. They don't tell you anything about what you can and can't do, what you should and shouldn't do. They don't really care. They can make some money off of you and they see the opportunity. And you're so desperate. You're just like, please, can somebody just tell me how to do this? Can somebody tell me how to taper off this damn drug so I don't either inadvertently die, right, from just taking the wrong amount or not taking enough or whatever. But worse than that, this drug also has the effect of creating suicidal ideations that are really strong. Like I had the weirdest inclinations when I was coming off of this, where I'd be at the top of the stairs and for some reason my brain was like almost, I don't know how to explain it, but I would imagine I would imagine myself falling down the stairs. Like I would almost, it was strange. And of course I'm not trying to think of that. It was just something that popped in, but there were so many of those intrusive thoughts that were really not me at all. They weren't Evie and how Evie really feels. It was just like somebody else was driving and I couldn't even control the way my brain was deciding to behave. And worse, I couldn't even explain it to people because all of a sudden there were these weird gaps in my memories and also in my word recall. So it was like having Alzheimer's at the same time. So it was miserable from a mood perspective, but then I was also totally unable to explain to other people why I felt so bad. It was just like over the top. Like if you wanted to torture somebody, this is what you'd do. I wouldn't do this to my worst enemy. Let's just be clear. Anyway, some of the side effects. Oh, by the way, somebody that talks more extensively about this, if you are curious to learn more, there are lots of good websites out there. I did find one called benzobuddies.org, which is like a whole forum of all these different types of medications and how to come off of them. So regardless of what type of benzo it is, it's like a peer-to-peer kind of help forum where you can get your questions answered. People can help you work through the math because it's a little hard when you're in the middle of trying to come off of this drug to be doing math. Let me tell you, you're lucky if you can put a few sentences together at that time. And so, but also if you're curious about somebody else's story that's gone through a similar thing, Dr. Jordan Peterson had a lot of experience with this, and he too was put on it by a doctor. And of course, the media smears him as like, oh, he was addicted, what an addict, blah, blah, blah. But like, he took it as prescribed. Like some doctor wrote that script for him and thought it was a good idea for him to take it, and probably would have described him as being non-compliant if he refused to, right? Because that happened to me before when I didn't want to take something they were trying to give me. I was like, no. And of course, then it gets put in your patient file, so helpfully, that you're non-compliant. But anyway, so just so you know, and I'm sharing this just as sort of educational for anybody that's on this, so you know what to expect, but also so you know that you're not alone. And if you've already experienced this, I'm so sorry. I really am. I know that hell, it's awful. And if you have gone through all of this and are on the other side, congratulations. Truly, it is a big deal. And, it took me a couple years of having like these audio hallucinations where I thought people were calling my name and they weren't. I had dysautonomia, which is like my body couldn't regulate temperature or sensations. It was just really weird. I had really bad tinnitus. My memory was terrible. I had double vision all the time. I had anxiety on top of it all, so it just came roaring back. I had a lot of gastrointestinal stuff. My ears were ringing so much, but they were hypersensitive. Same thing with my eyes. So like too much light, too much sound was really hard. And then thankfully I came upon, I think it was somebody at our website actually was talking about how niacin was like such a big deal and it really helped them with other things. And niacin ended up really saving me. Like, I don't know that I would have come off of as much of this drug as I have if I hadn't had niacin with me. And you want the flush niacin because there's something about it that actually really helps regulate sleep, and your body's trying to rebuild so much and it needs those very basic building blocks. And so I took high doses of niacin, like 3,000 milligrams or something a night. Like, it was crazy at a certain point. And I got down from the 3 milligrams down to 0.21. So I'm a little under a quarter. And I honestly am so proud of myself. I'm not all the way done, but I am so grateful that I got the message when I did. And part of the reason I want to share that, or I shared this with you today, is because all of us know people who are struggling with mental health issues, that are struggling with depression and anxiety. And I'm sure all of us know people that are actually medicated. According to, it was hard to get the figures because each website seemed to say something different, but according to a few that I saw, like about 25% of college students are on antidepressants, anti-anxiety, or some kind of antipsychotic or mood stabilizer, which is just an outrageous number. I can't imagine that 1 in 4 is taking a prescription medication. According to this, like 31% of US adults experience some kind of anxiety disorder in their lifetime. That's also a huge number of people. And today is not the day to kind of look at why that's happening, to talk about our culture and the ways that it's not supportive, etc. But there are definitely some topics that I would love to get into in the future about that. So the takeaways from this, what I would love for you to take with you is, before you take any medications, look at them with a critical eye. Think about what somebody who's decided to prescribe that to you, what are their motivations? What do they stand to gain? What's their education? Why are they pushing these things? What other experience do they have? Now, as I'm older, I understand that there are many, many more modalities that you can utilize. And the number one thing really being that food is a wonderful, wonderful way to be more supportive of your entire system. I previously consumed all those carbs all the time. I was eating sugar a lot. I really ate everything I shouldn't, and I would do it in weird cycles too. I had a lot of disordered eating happening at that point in my life, and I've since been eating in the last. It's not even been very long that I've been doing a carnivore ketogenic diet. It's only been a few months now, but I feel so much better. It's crazy. My joints feel better. My thinking feels more clear. My memory is better. I know it can really help people with a lot of those more chronic conditions, which really, truly are their body trying to say, hey, wake up. There's something you're doing or eating or putting on your skin or ingesting somehow that isn't good for you. And please, whatever you do, just try to listen to your body and try to understand as best you can what it's telling you, because our body is our best early warning system for anything. And if you can find a true care provider, a care provider is somebody who is supposed to care. They're not supposed to, bum rush you through an appointment because they only have 5 minutes to spend with you and don't have time to hear about what's really going on with you. See if you can find somebody who's actually going to listen. And I know we have their doctors within the FLCCC docs. I'm not I say this because I truly care about those people and think they're good people doing good things in the world. There's no reason for me to suggest that, but there are others like that do a type of medicine where you pay a little bit per month to them. It's a direct care model where you pay a little bit to them, and then you end up having, a doctor on call for you whenever you need it. And it doesn't, for the most part, it doesn't get near the cost of insurance, and you get treated better. You get somebody who will sit down and listen to you and say, hey, how are you really doing? And what are you eating? And, what's going on with you? I think we all deserve that. Next, do your own research. Be that person. No matter what they say, just do your own research. It's always a good idea. And it's hard to find good things, but over time, I think, when you dig hard enough, you do find those voices, and you can tell when you read it or when you hear it. If you really listen to your intuition will tell you, like, this person is not spouting off a bunch of bullshit. This is real. Like, this person knows what they're talking about. You can know by their credentials, and if they bring data to the arguments that they have. Avoid taking benzos if you absolutely can. They are obviously useful in some situations like surgeries or whatnot, but they are not a long-term solution. Please don't take them unless you really, really have to. The devastation that they leave behind in their wake is not worth it. Trust me on this. It's just not worth it. And consider what other tools you can have with you, and learn them before you're in learn those tools before you're in crisis, before you really need them. What are some other ways you can cope with anxiety? What are some things you can do to calm your nervous system naturally? Water is a wonderful way to do that. Taking a bath, taking a shower, putting water in your face. Like, there are all these types of various tools that you can learn. So if you're struggling with anxiety, don't despair if it doesn't go away immediately, because some of these things build on each other. And in nature, I think that our pharmaceutical world has made this upside down, but in nature, it actually takes a little while for things to heal sometimes. And I don't think that we're used to that in this, like, everything is exactly where we want it, when we want it. And health isn't like that. It's something that you gradually build. And I really do believe that wellness can happen. Eat a carnivore or a ketogenic diet if you can. I think there's a saying, garbage in, garbage out, but it really is true. If you are having health issues and you want to try something different, check one of those things out. It's not going to hurt you, and it'll give you information, at the very least. And the last thing is, eat your own produce and food as much as you can, your own meat. There's so many ways that we get carcinogens is not the right word, but there are all sorts of pesticides and herbicides and things that are put on produce, not even just when it's being grown, but afterward, to keep it from spoiling between the farm and whatever market you might buy it at, that can be really bad for you to ingest. So anytime that you can buy from a farmer who's local, somebody that you can have a relationship with, who you can ask these questions directly to, do it. Spend the extra money to buy some meat that wasn't treated with any antibiotics or hormones, or which was given, a free and happy life. Your body is actually going to know the difference, and your body's going to thank you for that. Because if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And I wanted to share a couple of things that Thomas Merton said in closing here. He was way before his time, in a sense. He just somehow was able to speak to, I guess, issues he was having then, or that he could see, but which are so applicable to what we're going through now. He says, we live in a society whose whole policy is to excite every nerve in the human body and keep it at the highest pitch of artificial tension, to strain every human desire to the limit and create as many new desires and synthetic passions as possible in order to cater to them with the products of our factories and printing presses, movie studios, and all the rest. And then he goes on to say, one who is content with what he has and who accepts the fact that he inevitably misses very much in life is far better off than one who has much more, but who worries about all that he may be missing. The relative perfection which we must attain to in this life, if we are to live as sons of God, is not the 24-hour-a-day production of perfect acts of virtue, but a life from which practically all the obstacles to God's love have been removed or overcome. One of the chief obstacles to this perfection of selfless charity is the selfish anxiety to get the most out of everything, to be a brilliant success in our own eyes and in the eyes of other men or women. We can only get rid of this anxiety by being content to miss something in almost everything we do. We cannot master everything, taste everything, understand everything, drain every experience to its last dregs. But if we have the courage to let almost everything else go, we will probably be able to retain the one thing necessary for us, whatever it may be. If we are too eager to have everything, we will almost certainly miss even the one thing that we need. Happiness consists in finding out precisely what the one thing necessary may be in our lives and in gladly relinquishing all the rest. For then, by a divine paradox, we find that everything else is given us together with the one thing we needed. And I pray that this finds you and yours in a wonderful, healthy place, not needing any of the advice or the experiences that I shared today. But I do hope that wherever you are and whatever you're doing, that you're journeying towards wellness and resilience and a stronger life, and to know and be known by those you love and the community around you. And if you want to spend more time with us, feel free to tune into Peak Prosperity. There's a YouTube channel and also peakprosperity.com. We're having conversations like this every day, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. I will see you next week. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.